I'm going to tell you a story. It's a disturbing story. You have been warned. Um, and I think I may have talked about this like over a year ago, but there's a big update to this case that just happened over the past couple of weeks that I have not talked about. And that's where I want to get to. But I can't get there unless we start at the beginning of the story. So I'm going to do my best to tell this story. It involves a guy named Robert Fenton. He was a youth pastor. And when he was 26, he worked at this church right here. It's called Abide in the Vine Fellowship. It's outside of New York. So this guy, Robert Fenton, he was a youth pastor there. And he told a couple that attended the church that he was drawn to their daughter and meant to be with her. Meant to be with her. How old was she? She was 14. So that's troubling. So the church said, yeah, we don't want you to get married because that's a little too far. By the way, New York did allow 14-year-olds at the time to get married if you were 14 and like you had your parents' permission. That's messed up for a different reason. But the church said, yeah, you can't get married, but we will allow you to have a courtship with this 14-year-old child. And so there were boundaries present, and the two of them were never supposed to be alone. Certainly, were not supposed to touch each other, but they could write letters to each other, like, I don't know, loved ones during the Civil War writing by candlelight. They could write letters to each other until she turned 18. Guess what? That didn't happen. None of that stopped him from pursuing her. In fact, that girl later said she was betrothed to him. Like her parents allowed that to happen. She was basically promised off to this guy twice her age. And her parents later admitted Fenton would often push the boundaries. They just didn't realize how seriously that was happening. But here's what happened. At Fenton's request, the parents pulled their daughter out of public school and began homeschooling her. And they thought they were doing this because it's good for their daughter academically. But why did Fenton actually want them to homeschool her? It's because it was an opportunity for him to spend more private time with her outside of prying eyes at church. So he started visiting their home a few times a week. Uh, and then the sexual assaults began. No surprise there. Um, I feel like I need to say this. First, the assault started with his finger, later with her hands. But that's how serious this assault was. And a couple years later, she was officially engaged to him. But before they got married, before they were married, the assault got even worse. He made her perform oral sex on him. And it wasn't just illegal because she was underage. I mean, it also violated their own religious beliefs regarding abstinence before marriage, which I know is not the biggest issue here, but it just shows you that didn't matter what the rules were, they were going to break them. So just horrible, horrible stuff. Um, and according to another youth pastor at that church, this is a very conservative religious community. They held very puritanical, misogynistic views about the subject. They really believe the sort of thing that says if a man lusts after a woman, it's her fault. So it's why women always got to cover up, even today in like purity culture. Like, ladies, are you wearing a shirt that shows cleavage? You got to cover yourself because men may see you and stumble. And that's on you, women. And what if you're a curvier woman who can't really help that too bad? Like, get a corset. I don't know what you get. Get a thing and cover yourself up. Wear a burqa if you must. So, like, the thing is that the reason I bring that up is even though this now 18-year-old woman at the time knew that what was happening and what had happened to her was wrong, she felt like she couldn't tell anybody because they would have just blamed her. That is the culture she was brought up in. They would have said, oh, you 14-year-old hussy, how dare you lead this youth pastor on so that he's assaulting you with his hands and fingers. The pastor of the church at the time, his name was Fred Hoover. He was a little iffy about this relationship when he first learned about it. But according to Fred Hoover's son, the families basically got the leader of this church to support the plan by citing the marriage of Joseph and Mary in the Bible. because in the Bible, Jesus's mother is much, much younger than Joseph. And, quote, how could they be against God's will? So it was Fred Hoover who blessed this relationship, but only after both families agreed they're not going to date or kiss or anything before she becomes a legal adult. But by the time they all like shook on it, this guy had assaulted the girl many times over. So let's cut to the wedding. This wedding is going to happen. She turned 18. He can marry her now. But a couple weeks before the wedding takes place, Robert Fenton gets sick. He has pancreatitis. And he goes to the hospital. And for whatever reason in the hospital, he calls off the wedding and he tells the girl that getting married to her would ruin his ministry. And then after he gets better and he's recovered, he moves to Australia and just gets the hell out of Dodge. That all happened in 1998. All the story I'm telling you, all of that revolved around like 1998. And then he left the country and then he never came back. So let's cut to 2019. It has been 2 decades since that guy ran the hell away. At this point, that young woman is now 20 years older. She's like almost 40 years old at this point. So in 2019, she now has come to terms with what happened to her as a child. She's better versed in talking about it and understanding, like, no, it was not your fault, you sweet child. It was not your fault at all. What that man did to you was horrific. It was illegal. You were a victim of sexual abuse. And at this point, when she realizes that, she goes to law enforcement to tell them about it. I mean, she's not going to go to the church leaders. They were never going to help her. So she goes to law enforcement and she gave them the names of other church members who could corroborate her story. And by the way, they did that. They interviewed a lot of people associated with the church, and they all basically told the same version of this story. So I'm going to cut to April of 2022, because that year, this is about a year and a half ago, this is what is posted on the website for the Attorney General of Pennsylvania. At the time, it was Josh Shapiro. He was the Attorney General of Pennsylvania. He is now the governor. But back when Shapiro was the Attorney General, I'm sorry, I said last year. This is April 25th of 2022. This is what he posted. Attorney General Josh Shapiro today announced the charges against former youth pastor Robert Fenton for regularly assaulting a 14-year-old member of his religious community from 1996 to 1998. And look at this right here. The defendant used his power and authority in his religious community to lie, manipulate, and regularly abuse a young girl in his community. I promised we would hold anyone who is abusing children accountable, and Robert Fenton is no exception. Survivors experience a lifetime of anguish and trauma trying to overcome the impact of abuse. I want survivors to know we believe you and we will not let predators get away with the sexual assault of children. So, powerful statement. Very welcome statement. But you will notice that in that statement, he just said we have filed charges against this dude. What they did not say is we have the dude. Because guess what? He was still in Australia. And by the way, I want to show you one other thing here, which is guess what he was charged with? Check this out here. This is also from the same, from a local TV news team. Look at this. Fenton has been charged with indecent assault of a person under 16, involuntary deviant sexual intercourse with a person under 16, aggravated indecent assault, corruption of minors, and statutory sexual assault. And the Attorney General said his office will work with the U.S. State Department and Department of Justice to try to extradite Fenton from Australia. That's what they were trying to do. He lived in Australia. They couldn't get him, but they're working with the Australian authorities to say, can you give us this guy back? Because he's one of ours, and we have charges that he did these horrible, horrible things, and we want to take him to court, basically. So a couple other things. I'm going to get to an update to the story, but a couple things you should know. Fred Hoover, the pastor who blessed that relationship, he was still working at the church as a senior pastor and leading the church's school of ministry until 2021. And then he died. He was there for another 20 years. He never explained why he thought a fellow staffer could just like call dibs on a kid in the congregation. His church never explained why Fred Hoover had any business educating future religious leaders, given how he handled this. I will say his son, who said, "This is what happened with my dad," he was and still is married to the sister of the survivor in this case. And he's very much on the survivor's side and not on his daddy's side. And he's speaking out about this stuff too. So good for that kid. He's not a kid anymore, but good for his son, Fred Hoover's son. Um, last April, about a year after Josh Shapiro made that announcement, the survivor asked the state of Pennsylvania, "Do you have any updates on my case? Because, like, I haven't heard anything." And she was basically told, "We got nothing new to report." Uh, the office has requested assistance from the FBI to apprehend the defendant. Basically, nothing had changed. The Attorney General's office in Pennsylvania, was still trying to get Robert Fenton out of Australia. So it just looked like the case had stalled. They couldn't find him or they couldn't get him for whatever legal reasons. And about a year and a half ago, that person, the survivor, decided to go forward with her story. Because at that point, she had come to terms with what happened to her, and she didn't want this to remain a secret. She didn't want to be known as a victim anymore. This is Sarah Carr. She is working as, at the time, she was trying to get certified to be a financial therapist, which I will tell you about in a second. And I'm happy to say she is now a certified financial therapist. But she came forward and told her story. And that's why we know so much of all of this, right? She was hesitant. She spoke to me about this a year and a half ago, and she wasn't sure she wanted to tell people to use her name. She wasn't sure she wanted to go forward with the story, but she also knew everyone in her life circle knew the details. So, like, who was she trying to hide from? You know, her parents and sister were named in the complaints. Everyone who knew about the relationship knew it was her. And everyone in her community knew what had happened with the people. So it's like she couldn't escape it no matter what. So she spoke to me about this a while ago. And some of the things she told me a year and a half ago, she said part of her frustration is that so many adults in her religious community really didn't seem to have a problem with child marriage. They might have condemned Fenton for the abuse if they knew about it, but they still didn't see him as a predator even when they did not know about the abuse, even though he was a 26-year-old who was like betrothed, had a 14-year-old betrothed to him. If anything, they were still going to blame her for causing him to lust after her. But predator or groomer, like, those are accurate descriptions of this guy. In fact, she said, before he went after her, he went after another child in the congregation, except that girl's family moved away. Sarah's did not. And so he went after her. The attention moved to her. When people in the community, she told me, found out about this stuff, they always found justification for what his behavior was. Whether it was like, well, there were prophetic dreams, maybe he needed to be with you. Or they blamed the girls for leading him on. And she said she wanted people to understand that what happened to her, it's not one bad apple in the form of Robert Fenton. She blamed purity culture, that mentality, and all the churches that allow that mentality to thrive. She blamed the fact that autonomy is revoked from girls and women, and that culture teaches young women to be submissive and obedient. It blames children for the abuse inflicted upon them by adults. She wanted people to ask themselves, can a teenage girl raised in a church where women submit to authority really say no? Because she didn't feel like she could. I'm going to skip ahead a bit. I spoke to a number of people who were close to Sarah, people in her life, siblings, friends of hers, who all now share the same thing, that they started questioning their faith when they learned about all this, which for them is a bad thing. They were taught as young women in that community, you can't say no. You got to do whatever the men in your life tell you to do. Her one girl's own mother taught her that upon marriage, she could never resist her husband, effectively denying the existence of marital rape. Um, that woman, a friend of Sarah's, told me it's a culture that sets women up for abuse. And she said that even in their youth group, because that's how she knew Sarah, a lot of kids there, they thought that relationship between Sarah and Robert, and I use relationship very loosely there, they all thought it was like gross, but none of them could speak out about it. They didn't know better to speak out than to speak out about it, partly because they didn't want to hurt Sarah's feelings. They just assumed, oh, that's Sarah's church. They do things like that over there. Um, and then the friend added, as girls, we didn't have a voice anyway. How sad is that? Um, so anyway, I'm going to skip forward. I'm skipping a few of the details here because I know this is a long story. But I one thing I want to share with you is that one thing Sarah appreciated was the fact that it's her story doesn't seem like it's in isolation anymore. If you watch docuseries like Shiny Happy People about the Duggar family and the religious community they grew up in, it was kind of nice that more people were getting exposed to the type of culture she grew up in. And because they were exposed to it, maybe more people would be now willing to speak out against that stuff, which she thought was super important. And I mentioned that she's a certified financial therapist now, and what she said to me, like one reason she found that field extremely satisfying, this field I didn't even know existed. She said, we all hold beliefs about money that were framed through culture, childhood, and early experiences. And within financial therapy, we get to explore those beliefs and re-examine them and reframe them, letting go of beliefs that no longer serve our financial well-being. She said the process of deconstructing religious beliefs is nearly an identical process, so my experience lends well to the work, which makes a lot of sense. Like if you grew up in a very fundamentalist Christian environment, I imagine you don't know a lot about saving money or thinking about investments for the future because Jesus is going to come back. Why do you need to think about the future? What do you need to spend money on? Oh, spending it on yourself when you could give it to your church or God or something. Like, why would you do that? So it's true. There's a lot of things tied up with religion and the way you spend or not spend money. So very interesting thing. Okay, I promised you there was an update to this story. There is an update to this story. And check out this article that just happened a few weeks ago. And I didn't post about this and I didn't talk about this at the time because I was waiting for the shoe to drop, but now I can share this with you here. Uh, Here we go. This is from a Philippine news outlet, but check this out. In a statement, this commissioner of the Philippines Bureau of Immigration said 54-year-old Robert David Fenton boarded a flight to Los Angeles on Tuesday after being denied entry at the, I'm not going to pronounce it, Philippine airport. Basically, look at the next paragraph here. This guy, Robert Fenton, decided to fly from Brisbane, Australia to somewhere else. He was flying from Brisbane, Australia to the Philippines. And when he arrived at the Philippines, they were like, wait a minute, who's this guy? Why are there alerts going off in our computer with this guy's name? It's because, you could see in the paragraph here, his name prompted a positive hit in the Interpol derogatory system, basically saying this guy is wanted for sex crimes in the US. You need to get this guy now. And so as soon as he landed, look at that last part too. He said the foreign national, Robert Fenton, has been in the immigration blacklist for being an undesirable alien. So as soon as Robert Fenton landed in the Philippines and gets off the plane, there were cops waiting for him saying, we got you. They took him aside, verified he is, that same guy, and they said, "Oh, you're not coming to the Philippines. We're putting you on a plane to the United States." And so, where do we stand right now? As far as I can tell, because I've checked on this, the Pennsylvania Attorney General's office, which is no longer run by Josh Shapiro because he's the governor, there's someone new in charge, but fine. The Attorney General's office has not issued any updates on this yet. I've been waiting for them to say, we got our guy, we're going to take him to court, like now that we got him, all that stuff. They haven't done that yet. I'm waiting for it to happen. When I asked them, they're like, we have no comment. If we have comment, you'll hear about it like on the website. But he is at least in California. He's in custody. He's not getting away. And I think the plan is they're going to get him from California to Pennsylvania so that they can go through the legal process because there are charges out on this guy. That may take a little while, but it's starting to happen. So when I did speak with Sarah about this development as it was happening, since it has happened, and she told me she was shocked at first because she didn't think this day would ever come. She was hopeful that justice might be served. She told me it was relief on an entirely different level. And she said a weight I didn't even realize I had been carrying had been lifted. And then she added another thing. She said that in the weeks ahead, when this guy gets to Pennsylvania, which is going to happen soon, and he gets in the courtroom, she's going to have to be in the courtroom too, as the survivor here. And so it's not going to be easy for her, even though this thing that she hoped would happen has finally happened. She said to me, it's going to be a challenge to see my abuser for the first time since the summer of 1998. It's going to be difficult to testify at the preliminary hearing. I have to keep reminding myself that I am not responsible for other people's feelings or their discomfort around this. Adults in my life made decisions that either directly harmed me or contributed to the harm. There are consequences for that. There has to be accountability. And because she was brave enough to speak out about this, it looks like there finally will be. She also hoped this case would set a precedent so that other young women don't have to suffer the way she did. But, even as she's waiting for that day to come, which she's not looking forward to, but it's going to happen, she just told me she is feeling, and I'm quoting here, next level peace and validation. I'm going to stop there. If there are questions, thoughts, I'm so proud of her. And I'm happy that happened, that they caught the guy. Can you imagine being a parent saying, sure, this 28-year-old man can court my 14-year-old daughter? Gross. Well, to be fair, Zoe, he was 26. So, you know. But yeah, I mean, I can't, if I swear, if an 18-year-old guy said, oh, I like your 14-year-old daughter, that would be weird and icky. But like 26 and like her youth pastor, it's not just the age gap there, it's the power dynamic, it's so many problems. But yeah, I mean, and it's so easy to to be mad at them. And we should be mad at the parents for allowing that to happen. But part of me wants to think like, okay, how could that have happened? Because the parents didn't know any better. And why didn't they know any better? It's because they were part of this religious community that told them this was a thing that could happen and it's not weird. And so like maybe placing all the blame on the parents is not the right thing to do. Some of it, sure, but it's like, how could they not have known any better? Why were they not grossed out by this? The only answer I could think is, okay, they must not have known that this was a wrong thing to do. Something in them taught them this is plausible. And then you have to go back to the source, and the source is this religious community. And they're worried about Sharia law. I swear, I'm in business because bad Christians keep doing shit every day, and they have for the past like 20 years. Um, I mean, I don't know how you could read stories like this and come away thinking the problem is that there are some bad religions out there, and it's the one that's not ours. And obviously, there are plenty of Christians who would hear this entire story and say that's awful, that's horrible, that doesn't represent what I believe my religion stands for. And I appreciate that. But like, we need more Christians to call out these religious groups and push people away from purity culture. I'm not talking about like progressive Christians saying fundamentalists are bad. I'm saying like we need all Christians to say Southern Baptists hold disturbing views about women, non-denominational megachurches hold disturbing views about women and sex and all this stuff. Like, no, we're not talking about Westboro Baptist Church here. We're saying you need to be mad at the like most ubiquitous churches in your community, the Southern Baptists, the Jehovah's Witnesses with their thinking about stuff, the evangelical churches that have a lot of power in these communities. Those are the groups that need to be called out because they're the ones spreading they won't do the marry a 14-year-old, no, but they're the ones who teach and spread purity culture, even if they don't use those words. So that's who people need to be mad at. It's almost like if you don't want your children sexually abused, church may be the last place you want to take them. I know, isn't it funny? Not the right word to use here, but isn't it funny that like people, why do people go to church? Why do people who aren't even that religious take their kids to church? Because they think church is where you have to go because tradition is good, because you got to give your kids morality. And then what happens at a lot of churches? A lot of very, very bad things happen at churches. This being an extreme version of that, but not a unique story by any means. But like, yeah, this is what happens at a lot of churches. And like, at what point does it come to their minds like, okay, maybe my church doesn't do it, but my church contributes to the problem. And maybe we can find all the benefits of church outside of church. Because that's what a lot of people are doing. You want community? There are other communities you can find that are not based around harmful values and views and things like that. Go find that. You want a tradition? Join a friggin' pickleball intramural league. Have your kids join an after school club. It's fine. They'll be fine. You don't need church for that stuff. Is there anything that suggests he also continued to assault children while he was in Australia? He probably did, since pedophiles usually don't change. Robin, it's a fair question. I don't know what this guy was doing in Australia. He's like Jesus between the ages of like 8 and 32. I have no idea where he's been or what he's been up to. I have no clue what he's been doing. I mean, if he was running a church in Australia, you have to think like, well, then we would have known where he was and it would have been easier to catch this guy. I don't know what he was doing. I also I wonder if the reason he got on a plane to the Philippines is like he thought he's in the clear and like the search for him was off. That had to be what he was thinking, right? Like, was he hiding for 20 years? I don't know. I mean, we'll find this out very soon, I'm sure. But it's a fair question and definitely something to think about. They should follow Jesus' advice and gouge their eyes out. That's a Bible verse. We're not suggesting violence, but yes, Olivia.